This is Practical Chaos Podcast, Episode 3, Self-Care. It's a Trap. I'm Emily, and together we will explore bad advice with good intentions. Today we're talking about this beautiful trap that is self-care, that is spouted at us day in and day out, that's Instagram hashtagged, beautiful face masks and the best bubble bath bombs you've ever thought. A little disclaimer, there may or may not be swears, so please prepare your butts. All right, my good friends, self-care. All right, we have all heard it before. Don't forget to set aside some time for your self-care, drink some wine, read a book, etc., etc. I find it nearly impossible at times to indulge in what I'd classify as self-care. Is eating a whole cake self-care? Because I think that it could be. I think a lot of things could be self-care. And I've definitely sat in the middle of my floor and ate a whole chocolate pie. Did I feel better? No, I actually felt a lot worse, and I still had all of my things to do after I had done it. It just wasn't good. Self-care takes work. It's not easy. It's not something that you kind of just do, and it's just this magical Band-Aid for everything that's ever gone wrong in your life. And the worst part is when we're most in need of this self-care is when it is the most impossible to do it. Oh, you're overwhelmed and overworked and want to cry because, like our last episode, sleep when the baby sleeps, the baby didn't sleep. So you sit there and you know that you need to get your day behind you and get everything ready for the next day and wind yourself down so you can go to bed. But it's impossible in such a tall order to be able to sit there and say, oh no, I'm good. Let's go ahead and just finish this. And the worst part is self-care perpetuates just this cycle of shame for yourself. You sit there and you're like, oh, so I'm taking this time for self-care. But why didn't I do, XYZ? Why didn't I go grocery shopping instead? Why didn't I clean the kitchen? Why didn't I reorganize every single one of my baby's clothes? Because half the clothes in his closet, he just doesn't fit. These are all things that you sit there and ask yourself. And then if you're not asking yourself that, because say you got everything done, do I deserve to do this self-care that I'm doing? Do I deserve to, indulge myself a little bit? And it's terrible because in our society, it's just full of so much shame across the board. Whether it's mom shaming, whether you are single and you're being shamed for that, or you're married and you're being shamed because you're deciding not to have children because that's selfish of you. How dare you not give me grandchildren? I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it is something. The best way to kind of get over that shame is to really sit there and recognize and give your shame some name shame name, whatever you want to call it. But to sit there and be able to name your shame and say, okay, I'm feeling and shaming myself right now, because that lets you be able to dismantle it a little bit and kind of tell yourself, okay, I don't need to be ashamed of doing this for myself right now. Now, on the flip side, that is all easier said than done, especially when you have anxiety and depression, because your whole day is filled with this shame and this feeling that you're not good enough, not even for yourself. Now, when we talk about self-care, like I said before, everyone thinks, okay, I'm going to drink some wine and do a face mask and all this other stuff, which is all fine and dandy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to be part of your self-care. So indulgence is not self-care. If it's something that makes you so guilty and unhappy with yourself, it's not self-care. It is not, yes, indulging yourself with, a nice, beautiful frappe from Starbucks can be fun and dandy, but that indulgence stops being self-care the second you start feeling so guilty and unhappy with yourself that you just can't even imagine feeling better. This threshold is different for everybody. Some people, it's a really low threshold. Just getting, that fancy drink or putting on a face mask and spending 10 minutes on yourself could be the threshold for you where you're like, damn, I really shouldn't have done this. I should have been doing something else. And other people, they can go on a whole shopping spree and not feel bad until they do their shopping spree, take themselves out to lunch, and then they're going to a movie or, something along the lines of that. It's one person's self-care can be another one's gateway to self-harm, depending on the relationship you have with that activity. So moderation is a huge key when it comes to self-care. Like I said, eating a whole pie. on your kitchen floor because you're super sad and you think that it should make you better. For people who have a really healthy body image, this might not be a problem.
Like bouncing around the neck.
They might be fine sitting there and saying, oh, okay, I'm going to go ahead and eat this whole pie, and that's fine because I go and work out tomorrow. Whereas myself, I don't really work out as often as I should or as consistently as I should. And so to do this kind of is really bad because I struggle to lose that weight, and I struggle with this image that I have of myself. And so for me, that was probably more self-harm than it was self-care, which is not a good thing at all. You have to just be honest with yourself when you're sitting there and looking at your self-care. Like, is this actually going to help me feel better, or am I going to feel worse about this in an hour, in a day, in a week, because I spent too much money and I knew that I should have budgeted it different. I ate a whole pie and now I know I might gain 2 pounds just from that. These days self-care is touted as a balm for everything. Oh, are you stressed? Self-care. Oh, you're not sleeping? Self-care. You have physical illnesses, you have fibromyalgia, guess what'll fix that? Self-care. You have OCD and depression? Self-care, man. You're anxious? Self-care. But self-care for people with a mental illness looks way different than self-care for people who are not suffering from these mental illnesses. So mental illness is a huge thing that's going to really determine the way that you do your self-care. People with anxiety are some of the people that need to focus on this self-care a lot, but it's so difficult because us people with anxiety, that's me wrapped into this, we think that we should indulge in this self-care, but we can't stop worrying. We can't find that calm that you're supposed to be able to find in your self-care. And this is true for 20% of adults because there's 20% of adults are diagnosed with anxiety. There's probably a lot more than that have it that are undiagnosed, because sometimes you can have a mental illness. It can be undiagnosed because you found ways yourself to cope with it, and that's okay too. If it becomes overwhelming, that's when you really need to ask someone for help. This is one of the most prevalent mental illnesses within the United States, within the adult population. That's absolutely ridiculous. People with anxiety typically can't experience that simple peace of just being yourself. There are too many to-dos and what-ifs flooding their mind and body at any given moment, and taking a time out from that busy pace of life only highlights the irregularity, which then starts a whole cycle of guilt and am I good enough? I'm not good enough for this. I don't deserve to do this, and just spirals out of control, which is ridiculous. But guess what? Guess what's awesome? Your self-care is your business and nobody's else. Nobody else's. Goodness, if I could talk, that would be great. Your self-care is your business. Nobody else can tell you how you need to do your self-care. So what's fantastic about that means if eating a whole pie is self-care, go for it. If taking a bubble bath for an hour and a half is self-care, go for it. If playing video games is self-care, go for it. Nobody else can tell you what is your self-care. Now, what does happen, especially with moms and parents, is we tell ourselves I'm too tired and I'll do this later. And so when we tell ourselves that, it really just kind of perpetuates this whole, oh, I'll do me later. That's not a big deal. Oh, I'll focus on that a different time. No big deal. But it is a big deal because we do need to take care of ourselves. And like I said, that self-care comes in different packages for everybody. It also doesn't need to take a whole lot of time at one time. Your self-care could be a process that you do throughout the day. Your self-care could be taking 20 minutes to do your makeup in the morning because that makes you feel good about yourself. Your self-care could be taking a shower every night, to wash off the day. It's whatever makes you feel better. It doesn't have to be that hashtag self-care, because self-care is boring and uncomfortable and hard. It's not that hashtag self-care with a picture of a Frappuccino. This isn't the self-care that everybody needs. The self-care that you need is telling yourself to eat a vegetable. Because all you've eaten is pie and chicken nuggets for 2 days. Self-care is going for a walk. because you know you and the dog both need to get out. It's so different because self-maintenance and self-care are two very, very different things. Because self-care doesn't mean doing whatever you want if it feels good right in that moment. It means looking after yourself and doing what you need to feel better over the long run, not just in that, moment. Sometimes you have to be your own mom and tell yourself to go brush your teeth. Go brush your teeth, wash your face, make a list of things you need to do for the day. That is self-care. It's not, like I said, it's not self-indulgence. It's not sitting there and taking yourself to the beach necessarily. Could that be a part of your self-care? Of course it could, because maybe you haven't left the house in 3 days. So like I said, it's different for everybody being able to sit there and say, what is self-care? I message my mom quite frequently on Facebook Messenger, and oh my gosh, I'm having the worst day in the whole world. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And the things that my mom tells me are things I should be telling myself and that I've started to use as my own internal dialogue. Wash your face, brush your hair, brush your teeth, drink a cup of coffee. My mom's advice, have a cigarette. Just find something that you can do for you that's going to make you feel a little bit better and either start your day or end your day. It doesn't need to be the most indulgent, ridiculous thing. It doesn't need to be a trip to the spa. It doesn't need to be manicures and pedicures every day. That's self-maintenance. Manicures and pedicures is you maintaining something you used as self-care once. Can you use a manicure as a self-care? Absolutely. You want to make yourself feel better. But when you're doing it every single month, at that point it's maintenance. It's no longer self-care. So just trying to find something to do. Like I said, it's not always doing something fun or even something nice. More often than not, it's doing something that's important but very hard for you to do. That's why it's care and it's not self-fun. So self-care can include things like going outside, cooking something that is of a nutritional value for you, putting on clean pajamas. And that is exactly how it is spelled in my note. Pajamas. So, putting on clean pajamas, staying home when you want to go out and binge drink, going out with friends when you just want to hide and do nothing at all. Forcing yourself to do these things that you really don't want to do. That is self-care because you're putting yourself out there and you're doing things that are better for you in the long run, not just in that moment. If you stayed home today and you wanted to go out and drink and you know that you really shouldn't because it's not good for you, good for you. If you were in your house for the last 3 days and you forced yourself to go out with some friends and have some lunch and you had a great time, great for you. Those are all things that you need to be doing for yourself. Taking your medication every day is self-care. That's something that I struggle with myself. I've only recently become consistent with my medication, which is what helps me, on a day. Seeing your therapist is self-care. Do you have a counselor? Are you making those appointments instead of canceling them and pushing them off and never showing up to them like I may or may not do on a daily basis? If you're going and seeing your therapist, that is self-care. Making it to those doctor's appointments that give you anxiety, just making them, that is all self-care. Dragging yourself to yoga, or like I said, out on a walk with the dog is self-care. And bath bombs and pore strips and face masks can all be part of your self-care routine, but they cannot replace that genuine intervention and structural support. So those aren't going to replace going out with your friends and, sitting down for a meal. Those are not going to replace the fact that you ate nothing but chicken nuggets for 3 days, but you did a face mask, so now your face is at least not greasy, but the whole inside of you is gross. Eat a salad, even if it tastes gross. It'll be okay. Drink a glass of water. It'll be fine. I promise. Maybe. We can put something in the water. It's okay. Too many times now, self-care is that Instagram hashtag with a pretty coffee drink or your feet up at a pedicure. And like I said, these are all good things, and feel free to relax and indulge in those things. But don't forget what that real self-care is. I care about all of my friends and their mental health, and brushing your hair and remembering to eat is much more self-care than a pretty face mask with a fancy name. I have not always been as anxious as I am. A lot of my anxieties and stuff got worse after I had my son, and that has to do a lot with fun hormonal changes, being a mom and all this other fun stuff, and these extra responsibilities that I now have as a person. And so I didn't necessarily always understand this part of mental health. So I didn't always understand what sort of things could happen and why you might not brush your hair for a week and a half or 2 weeks. And one of my best friends, she calls me up one day crying, and I just didn't understand. I was like, what is wrong? Like, what can I do? I was at work, but I was getting off soon. Like, what do you need from me? And she's like, I just need you to come help me. I think I'm going to have to cut all of my hair off. And I was like, oh my gosh, what do you mean? And she had put her hair up in this bun on the top of her head, and it just she might kill me for telling this story, but it's okay. I love you. She had put her hair in a bun on the top of her head, and just motherhood takes over sometimes, and you just don't get a chance to take care of yourself. And so she had washed her hair and done all this stuff, but you wash your hair, you throw your hair up in a bun without doing anything with it. And eventually, you do hit a point where it's kind of the point of no return. And so she called me because she had hit this point, and she was just ready to chop all of her hair off. And I was like, no. I will be there. Give me like an hour. I'm going to run to the store. I'm going to run back to my house. I'm going to bring some food. We're going to be good. So I went to the store and I grabbed some conditioning products and some detanglers. I ran back to my house because I knew I had some some hair masks and other stuff like that would help her hair. And I went and got some combs, and I went and got a nice pair of scissors. And I show up at her house, and my poor friend has this huge knot on the back of her head, and she's just trying her hardest not to cry. And I was like, oh my gosh, 1 second, we'll help you. And so I sat there for, I want to say it was like 4 or 5 hours. Maybe it was less than that, but I know it was at least 3 or 4 hours. And, did everything I could to not have to cut all of her hair off. At the end of the day, we ended up being able to leave her hair shoulder length rather than chopping it all off like her and I both thought we might have to. And she just was so grateful that I didn't judge once, not a single time, because just because I didn't understand exactly what she was going through or what had really gotten her to that point, what I understood is that she needed me as a friend, and she needed me to help her with that self-care that she wasn't able to do for herself. And so I sat there and we fixed it all for her, ate some snacks, laughed a little, and ended up with a huge pile of hair, but not as big as it could have been. She still had hair, and it was actually a pretty decent haircut, if I don't say so myself, for not being a professional. And from then on, she just had it that much easier when she did need to do that part of her self-care routine. It's not always pretty. It's not always fun, and sometimes you do need a little bit of help to get that self-care done for yourself. In motherhood, we lose ourselves. I have told many friends over the last couple years that I don't know who I am anymore. By doing this podcast, I'm really hoping to figure out who I am and where I'm trying to be in my life, because as a mom, we just lose ourselves for years. You don't know who you are. What are my hobbies? Because right now, my hobbies are cleaning the house, watching TV, and social media. Those are the only hobbies I have time for. Those are the only things that I have time to kind of take a moment to do for myself. It happens, and you don't need to feel guilty if you don't want to go to 100 outings just to prove you're still fun. You're allowed to tell people, no, I don't want to go out because I'm tired because my kid was up until 5 o'clock in the morning. It's okay. You can tell me that, and I'll understand. You want to fall asleep at 9 p.m.? Do it. That could be part of your self-care. You want to cook yourself a nice meal? Do it. Go for it, man. Self-care, like I said, self-care comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and we don't need to be judging each other on how this self-care comes into play. What we do is we need to take care of yourself and preserve you. Whether that's one little tiny speck of who you are, it could be, like I said, something as simple as I want to play video games. That's something that I personally have enjoyed doing before I had kids, but finding the time is not always easy. And so if that's the one thing that you do to preserve your you-ness, then that is perfectly okay. Eventually you'll find the fun. It's going to emerge from motherhood, and you'll be stronger, tougher, and a freaking mother of the dragons, because I'm Kiki, and yes, we are all mother of dragons, because we all walk through that fucking fire, and get there and do what we need to do. You're welcome. You know, so all of that is stuff that you are going to be able to do. We all walk through this fire for our kids, helping them turn into actual people. And one day you'll look around and realize you can pick up your hobby you talked about years ago, or you'll make your manicure appointment and keep up with the manicure. Because I can always make the first appointment. It's like the 12 after that to keep my nails from looking ridiculous that I just can't seem to get. Whenever I do find a girl, she always laughs at me because I always end up needing a new set, and it's the most ridiculous thing in the whole world. We all go through seasons in our life, and the self-care that you're providing for yourself is going to change and evolve through all of those seasons. When you have a newborn, that self-care is sometimes going to be just taking a shower. You know, if you have a toddler, your self-care could include eating a meal that's not chicken nuggets. You know, as you go through your life, your self-care is going to change, and that's okay. It's okay for your definition of self-care to change and to be different from mine. My self-care is going to sound a whole lot different than your self-care, because this podcast is part of my self-care, taking care of myself and being able to get things that I have feelings for off of my chest. Embrace your humanness and self-care by just making sure that you're taking care of yourself. Changing your undies, brushing your teeth, those are all self-care. And guess what? You are a champion at it. So go for it. Do that self-care. If you need help, ask for it. There are people out there who love you and will help you get your self-care routine started, or help support you through something that you're using as your self-care, such as an exercise group, getting in shape, eating healthy. If those are all things you want to do as your self-care, find a support group to help keep you accountable for it. All of that is okay, and it's good to do. All right, my friends, thank you for listening. As always, I really appreciate your support. Go to the show notes if you want to find anything specific about this episode. For this one, I'm not going to really have anything posted as far as any resources. The last 2 episodes, I did post postpartum depression resources. So if you feel that you are suffering from that by listening to this episode, please head back to episodes 1 or 2 to find those resources for you. To go ahead and get a hold of me, follow me on social media, all of that good fun stuff, please head over to my website, practicalchaospodcast.com. All of this good things for you. Check out the links in there. I do have my Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and I also have links to all of my episodes up to this point, and they will keep going from here on out. So next week's episode, first off, if you are tuning in and this is the first episode that you listen to, please head back and listen to episode 1, It Takes a Village, or episode 2, Sleep When the Baby Sleeps. None of these episodes need to be listened to in order. You can listen to them however you want. Next week's episode is going to go a little bit further from motherhood, and so next week's episode is based all on the great little piece of advice called being in love means never having to say that you're sorry. So go ahead and keep an eye out for that. That'll be coming out next Sunday, the 26th, I believe is the date. Make sure you're sharing and subscribing so you know when I'm taking out new episodes. Head over to my Facebook to get some Facebook-only little blurbs and fun behind the scenes. Head to my website for a blog with more things about my life. Once more, that's www.practicalchaospodcast.com. And as always, keep it rolling. Love y'all. Toodles.